the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and they threw him into the pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then the next bit I'm going to be reading is in 39. So next is in 39, verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him an overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. So now he's been thrown into a pit and then sold into slavery. But already you can see where he's staying faithful. He's not losing faith and losing his hope. And because of that, God is blessing him where he is and blessing his master in the house of it. So he's already gone from a bad situation to still not a great situation, but a lot better than it was now, just because of his faith in God. And then later in verses 6 through 20, now Joseph was a handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. As soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I had lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me." But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant has treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So now he hasn't done anything wrong, and his situation has gotten much worse. From what we can see, he didn't do anything. In fact, whenever it says she spoke to him day after day and would not listen to her. Throughout all of this, he was staying faithful to God. He said, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So he's still staying faithful. He's not listening to her, even though she keeps bothering him over and over again. And even through that, she lies about him and gets him thrown into prison. So from what we can see, he's now been put back into a bad situation for just because. My notes are not very organized. Just a second. Okay, so after he gets put into prison, never mind, I did have more to read. So now he's been put there, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to succeed. So now he's been put back into another bad situation, but he's still staying faithful to God. He's still trusting him. And because of this, he's been blessed again to be put back into the head of what's going on there. So it's still not as good a situation as he was in before, but because of his faithfulness to God, he's still been put into a good spot. So after this, he comes into the prison, and the king's put his two officials, the cupbearer and the baker, are both in there now. And they both have a dream the same night, and then they're talking about it, and he comes in, and one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker, of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. And when Jesus came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So at this point in prison, he's still remembering God. He can interpret their dreams through God, and he points that out. He doesn't just go and interpret their dreams and take any credit for himself. He's still giving God the glory for what he's able to do. And then in so he interprets their dreams, both of them, with their own separate meanings. And then in verse 14 it says, "Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do to me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit." So that's what I was saying earlier, where he hasn't done anything, and like he said, he didn't do anything to get put in there, and then he's been put in there. And then he interprets the other person's dream, and then in 3 days, both the dreams come true how he said they would. And I don't know where I'm next. Okay. So now he's interpreted their dreams. They both were correct. And then after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reeds and the grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood up by the other cows of the bank in the Nile. And the ugly thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And then in 9, this is verse 41, and then 9 through 13. So then Pharaoh has that dream, and then he dreams another one that's the same basically. It's got the 2 corn stalks, or the 7 corn stalks that are fat and good, and then 7 more come that are wilted and not good, and they eat up the good ones, and they're still wilted and no good. And then after that, he gets magicians and gets people and has them come to try and interpret his dream, and no one's able to interpret his dreams. And then in verse 9 it says, "Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker into custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dreams. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." So this has been 2 full years since they were put out of prison. So through all this time, Joseph's been stuck in prison. He got stuck there at no fault of his own, and then he interprets these guys' dreams and says, whenever you get out, please tell Pharaoh about me, and the guy doesn't. And then 2 years later, when Pharaoh has these dreams, the cupbearer remembers and tells the Pharaoh about him. And then Pharaoh calls Joseph out of the prison, and he gets him ready, and he goes to talk to the Pharaoh. Yeah, so then he's talking to Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him both his dreams, and then Joseph tells him what they are. The 7 years of famine are going to come, and everything in the land's going to die, and they're not going to be able to grow any food. Backwards. I see Holly laughing at me, I think. Anyways, 7 years of plenty are going to come, and there's going to be a bunch of food. And then after that is 7 years of famine where there will be no food. And then he tells Pharaoh that, and he says, "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." And this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all of the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. So after everything that's happened to him, after he's been sold into slavery, and then he was put in the guy's house, and then after that he was put into prison, and then he was stuck in prison for 2 years, and then finally he's pulled out of prison, and he's able to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams, and he's wise, and so the Pharaoh puts him over everything. So now he's gone from being in prison to being head of all of Egypt, and nothing happens unless he says for it to happen. Now I have to figure out what I'm supposed to read next. Where am I at? Okay, so then later, the 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years... Oh wait, I forgot part. So after this, he starts gathering up grain. He takes a portion of the grain from the harvest, from each person's harvest, and he stores it up. And Joseph stored up grain in abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. So after he's been put in this position, he figures out how to get things set up, and now he's got so much food and so much grain that they can't even count it. It's more than they have. There's more there than they can count. And then the 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. As Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says to do, you will do." So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was over the whole earth. So now, not the 7 years of plenty are over. They're into the 7 years of famine, and not just Egypt, but everywhere has to come to Egypt to buy grain. And so in this time when there's no food, his brothers come up to Egypt because the land of Canaan has no food either. So his father sends all of them up to get food, and then they come up and they meet Joseph, but they don't recognize him. He recognizes them, but they don't know who he is. And then he doesn't tell them who he is, and he basically accuses them of being spies and says they're coming just because they want to learn all the weaknesses of the land and everything. And so then he gives them their food, but he keeps one of them and sends it back and tells them they have to bring their youngest brother, who they left behind, to prove that they aren't spies. And then they go back to tell their father, and he's like, if you bring my youngest son to Egypt, then it's going to kill me. I can't handle that if something were to happen to them. And so they stay there until they run out of food again. And then their father says for them to go back to Egypt, and they say they can't do it without Benjamin. They can't see Pharaoh again unless they have Benjamin with them. So eventually he says okay, and they bring Benjamin up to Joseph, and they get food again, and then he puts his cup in Benjamin's bag and gives them their grain and sends them back off. And he sends a servant after them and has them search their bags and find Benjamin's cup and tells them that he's going to keep him as a servant. And then, because they don't want to go back to their father, they all go back to Egypt to talk to Joseph again. And it's at that point whenever he finally tells them who he is. And probably should check where I'm supposed to actually read again. And so then, so Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near to him, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all the house, and ruler over all of the land of Egypt." So they come, and he has every reason to be mad at them, but instead he says, "It wasn't you who sent me here, it was God who sent me here." And he already can see that this was all of God's plan, and there was a reason it all happened, and he ended up being here. And because of that, he's able to get food to everyone. So it shows once again that he's still trusting in God and knows that he has a plan. So then after that, he sends his brothers back home with food, and he tells them to bring his father back. And then whenever they're coming back, he tells them that because they're shepherds and they can't like share their flocks with the Egyptian shepherds or something, they get the best part of land in Egypt. And then his family comes, and they're all back in Egypt. I feel like I had something about that. Yeah. So then he brings them all back into Egypt, and they settle in Goshen, which is, what does it say about it? Nicest part of Egypt. And then after that, I have chapter 50, 19 and 20. And it is, "But Joseph said to them," so at this point, Joseph's father has died. He was old already when he came to Egypt. So at this point he's died, and Joseph's brothers get worried that the only reason that he was being nice to them was because of their father. And so they're worried that he's not going to be nice to them anymore. So they go to him and they say, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil for you. And now please forgive the transgressions of your servants, of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And then 19 through 20. "But Joseph said to them, 'Do not fear, for I am in the place of God. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So once again, he's saying that this all happened because it was all part of God's plan. He's saying that it's not even their fault that he's there, but it was just what God had planned for him. And the three main things I wanted to take out of this was the one, whenever we've got bad stuff happening, it's easy to get discouraged, but Joseph had a lot of bad stuff happening. He was sold by his brothers into slavery, and then out of that, some good came from it, but then someone lied about him and got him thrown into prison, and he was stuck in prison for 2 years because the person he helped forgot about him. And then he finally got pulled out of that and put over all of Egypt, and throughout all of it, he remained faithful. Over and over again, it says that he trusted in God, or he gave God the credit for what was happening. So he could have, and it would have been easy to, once he got put in prison, to maybe remain faithful and to not get discouraged. But after 2 years, he had to stay faithful to God all that time, and he did. And the other thing is, sometimes, like this, it took 2 years before he was pulled out of it. But if he'd gotten out of prison before those 2 years, or hadn't been put into prison, then he wouldn't have been able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. He wouldn't be in the position that he was anymore. So he had to be in the prison for that to happen so that he could talk to the cupbearer, and he had to be in prison for 2 years. So throughout all of this, it was all part of God's plan, and in the end, it all worked out. Because even if you go all the way back to when they sold him into slavery, if they had not done that, then he would have been with his brothers, and they wouldn't have been able to get food anywhere. And everybody in Egypt and everyone around would not be able to get food. So it's just important to know that God has a plan, and even when it seems like something's taking forever and it can't be part of his plan because it's taking too long, it might be that whatever his plan is just hasn't come apart yet, or something. It's not happened yet. So that was all I had, I think. We won't have a time of invitation with a song. If anybody wants to talk to anybody or pray with anybody or something, we've got Luke and Uncle Nick in the back. You can come to me if you want. I can try and help, I guess. But first, let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this lesson that I was able to give. I pray that the words that were heard were your words only, and any that were not will be soon forgotten. I pray that you get us all home safe and would protect everybody and heal those that are sick. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.